Hi guys, our first time videotaping a math lesson, and I have my assistant. This is my daughter Morgan. Say hi.
Hi.
And she's going to erase the whiteboard for me when I'm done teaching from that spot. So, as a disclaimer, my classroom is now my daughter's bedroom. So if we take a look here, going around, oh, there's going to be our math lesson. We got a little whiteboard, a little chalkboard, and around we go. So this is our new classroom. The easiest place to set up. And we'll get started, right, Morgan?
Yeah.
Can you read what the lesson's called today?
No.
Try it.
I don't know.
What do you think that says?
Factoring.
Polynomials. Poly what? Polynomials. What does it say under that? Part 1.
Part 1.
Yeah, okay. So let's get started. We have this whole thing set up. See if I can put this in here. Okay. How's that look, Morgan? A little closer? I think that's good, right?
Yeah, pretty.
Okay. So, obviously this is not ideal for how we want to learn, but we'll do our best, and I'll try to explain as best I can with my little whiteboard. And we're basically going to follow along with the notes that are already on D2L. So if, oh sorry, Morgan's whiteboard. If you look at where we left off, which was synthetic division and long division, the very next one is called factoring polynomials part 1. From that, we're going to do a little assignment as the homework. Are we going to evaluate it? I don't know. Obviously, this is all unknown what we're going to do, but that's going to be the homework for tonight. And then after we get through that, we can move on to factoring polynomials part 2. Okay, but some things to go over in terms of what we have done so far. When we tried to graph before March break, there were 3 things that we needed. First, we had to find the zeros. Once we found the zeros, as you know, we just plotted them on the points. Yeah. And then we wanted to look at the end behavior. So that's the stuff as x approaches infinity, what happens to y. As x approaches negative infinity, what happens to y. So if we knew what direction to put our arrows on our end behavior, and we knew our zeros, all we needed to find was the turning points in between. Now the turning points we were kind of guessing at. Remember, we picked like a test point in between 2 zeros. And when we found where that was, we knew that it had to turn in some way based on whether the factors were linear, quadratic, exponential, quartic. We knew what type of behavior it was going to be. So we did look at that, and that made it good enough for us to sort of estimate how to graph, but it wasn't a perfect science. Now we're going to need to know more about those turning points, but that sort of creeps up when you take calculus. What we do need to know how to do out of today's lesson is, what if the factors aren't given? So what if it's not already in factored form? What do we do? So the question was, if it's not in factored form, if we can't tell exactly what the zeros are, then we are going to need to assess that. Now there's options. If it's linear, we just have to solve, basically find the x-intercept. If it's quadratic, then we can factor or use the quadratic formula. If it's cubic, quartic, quintic, we're going to have to do that in the next section. Okay, so this is really just a review of, do you remember how to factor? Do you remember what it means to find a zero? Okay, Morgan, I need this erased.
All of it?
All of it. You can erase all of it. Okay. Morgan's going to erase. We should be following along with this note here, factoring polynomials part 1. Okay, it was the next one in line. It's okay, keep going. Do you need help? It's hard?
What one did you use?
Want me to do it?
It hurts. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
That's easier?
Yeah.
It's hard to get good help these days, I'm telling you. This is how I'm homeschooling too. Homeschooling is how to clean a blackboard today.
Whiteboard.
Oh, sorry, a whiteboard. And being corrected. Hey, Morgan, hurry up. Want me to help you?
No.
I'll use this one.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, clean board. Out of the way. We don't want to make this video too long.
Mommy,
Okay.
can I...
No, move along. Okay, so in order to look at this, we're going to look at a couple different examples. The first one is going to be linear. Okay, and linear, in A here we had y equals 3x plus 6. If you want to find the zeros of that, what do you think y needs to equal? A 0 is an x-intercept. What is the y value when it crosses the x-axis? 0. So I put a 0 in for here, and it's just a matter of solving the equation. This we would consider grade 9 math. So the 6 comes to the other side, it becomes negative. In order to undo this little multiplication, we're going to divide both sides by 3. That cancels. We get x equals negative 2. So what is our 0? Negative 2, 0. That's our point that we would consider a 0. Okay? Grade 9 math, not a problem. If we go to the next section, you're right, Morgan, this one doesn't work as good. Use the other eraser, the blue one, Morgan. If we go to the next, so now we're going into what we would consider grade 10 math. Look, I want to write the exact examples that you guys have so you can fill them in. In grade 10 math, when you were trying to find zeros, the exact same thing was existing. You're now looking at a quadratic, knowing there can be no zeros, there can be 1 0, or there can be 2 zeros. Want to come say hi, bud?
No one actually there.
Come here. Just wave and say hi. That's my son, Ben. He's coming to see what's going on. Okay,
Michaela.
so don't worry. So in order to find the zeros here, we again have to let y equal 0, because that's what you're doing. You're finding an x-intercept. So when I let y equal 0, you have two options. If this is factorable, you can factor and find the zeros that way using the zero product property. If it's not factorable, you have to use the quadratic formula. So this one happens to be factorable. What, guys, what are two values that multiply to negative 18?
Sorry.
Add to 3. No one's answering my questions here. Positive
I don't
3 and negative, positive 6 and negative 3. Multiply to negative 18, add to 3. Now the zero product property says, and you'll remember, if these two things multiply to be 0, then one or the other equals 0. And in that case, we solve and we say x equals negative 6, x equals 3, and our two zeros in this case, because it's quadratic, it's a parabola, it crosses the axis in two spots, are negative 6, 0, and 3, 0.
Grade 12 math.
So all of this so far, Morgan, stop. All of this so far is review. Finding zeros of linear equations, like A, means you just solve. Finding zeros of quadratic equations means you have to factor, or in the case where it's unfactorable, use the quadratic formula. Okay, remember with quadratics you can have no zeros. That means the parabola is either opening up above the axis or opening down below the axis. Don't. You can have 1 0, the vertex is sitting on the axis, or you can have 2 zeros, which means it crosses at 2 spots. Okay, Morgan, you can erase.
This is way easier. Are they going to subscribe? No, the video didn't start. People only subscribe.
Morgan, you're too slow at this. I'm going to press hard. Okay, good.
Kind of hard.
Good, move out of the way.
Ouch.
Okay. So the next one on your sheet, purposefully put in here one that does not factor. Okay, this one does not factor. You would want to do it in the same way. You let y equal 0. And then you start to ask yourself, well, if I could factor this, it's a complex trinomial, you would have to use what I call the brain method to factor it. At this point, you should know how to factor. If it's not factorable, you can use the quadratic formula. Some things to remember. Value in front of x squared is your a value. Value in front of x is your b value. Value in at the end, the constant is your c value. You want to plug this in to the quadratic formula. Okay, so when we do that, we get negative 6 plus or minus the square root 6 squared minus 4, 2, negative 9, all over 2 times 2. 36 plus 36, so 6 times 9 plus 54. No, 8 times 9 plus 72. Trying to do math in my head.